Hello everybody, in this video we are going to continue our conversation about how to solve a quadratic function or a quadratic equation to find its x-intercepts. So with that being said, there's a couple things that I want to point out. When we're trying to solve a quadratic equation, the very first thing we have to do is make sure our equation is equal to 0. If it is not, then we need to actively take whatever numbers are on the right side of the equal sign and move them back over and combine them with their like terms. Once we do that, we should be able to factor into two sets of parentheses. So everything we've been doing by factoring by grouping has allowed us to find two parentheses as our answer. We're then going to take each one of those parentheses, set it equal to 0, and find the value of our variable. This is actually another way to find the y-intercept of a quadratic function. So with that being said, let's take a moment to look at our first example. So our first example is already set into two parentheses. So if we have two parentheses and they're both equal to 0, then there's nothing for us to do. All we have to do is take what's inside the first parentheses. So notice that the first parentheses has 2b plus 3. So we're going to say 2b plus 3 equals 0. And since we have two parentheses, I'm going to do the same thing with the second parentheses. So inside the second parentheses, I have b plus 8. I'm going to take b plus 8 and set it equal to 0. Now what I have is two smaller equations. We're solving for b in both of them. Once we have that answer is our y-intercept on a graph. So we should be able to plot it on the x-axis. So let's solve first and then let's plot. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my line to separate the left side and the right side of the equation. If I'm going to solve for b, I do need to get rid of the 3. So let's go ahead and subtract 3 from both sides. This gives me 2b is equal to negative 3. Now, keep in mind that not all your answers will be whole numbers. Some of them will be, but we do have to deal with fractions or decimals from time to time. So let's divide by 2. And so we get b is equal to a negative 3 over 2. Now, if you want a decimal, you can also use the decimal version, which is a negative 1.5. Now, I like the decimal because that's what I use to graph. So I much rather graph decimals than fractions. So you can use either one of these. All right, the second one is actually the easier one. So I'm going to draw my line. Here's my b, and all I have to do is subtract 8. So I get b is equal to negative 8. So our answer to this quadratic equation is two numbers. Our first number is negative 1.5. Our second number is negative 8. Notice I'm not using parentheses because this is not an ordered pair. Not an ordered pair. It is 2 points on the x-axis. So I'm going to put x-intercept right here. So let's go to the graph. Let's find our x-axis. This is my x-axis right here. It's our horizontal axis. And I want to label it just so you know that this is the x-axis. So we're finding 2 points on this x-axis. So y'all find negative 1.5. Here's negative 1.5 would be right here. Negative 8 doesn't even fit on this graph. So just know that negative 8 would be somewhere over here. So that's on me. And so when we're dealing with these kinds of functions, this is actually going to be a U-shaped graph. So something like this would cross our x-axis in two different points. So it could either open down or it can open up. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Right now we're just finding x-intercepts by solving a quadratic equation. All right, so let's take a moment and let's look at the second example. So if you look at the second example, that actually requires us to actually factor it, set it equal to 0, and then solve. So Let's see how far we can get on this one. First things first, make sure there's a 0 here, and there is. So we are ready to go. There's nothing to do at the beginning. All we have to do is factor. So we're going to ignore the fact that this is here to begin with, and we're going to factor that like we normally do. So I'm going to label A, B, C. I didn't give you an X, but you can create your own if you want to. So if you find it useful when we were working on it together, you can create your own X. So remember, we're multiplying A times C. So A is 3, C is 42. So let's multiply. 3 times 42 gives us 126. We're looking for things that add up to be 25. So I'm going to put minus 25x. All right, let's create. I'm just going to use this space right here, 126. And then I'm just going to go ahead and list them. So I'm going to pause real quick and list all my factors of 126. But remember what you're looking for. You're looking for two numbers that add up to be 25. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to use your calculator to generate the list of numbers if you want to use this as a shortcut. So especially when we're dealing with really big numbers, there's actually a way you can use your calculator to generate this list. So if you have a TI Nspire, which is what I have here, you can use the same steps. So I'm going to start at the home screen. I'm going to hit B for graph. And when you come up here, you can either hit the tab, this tab button right here, for this to pop up. So if it's not already on there, hit tab. And you're going to want to scroll up or down. So I'm going to go right here. And notice that the number is 126. So I'm going to type in 126 divided by x. So by doing this, your calculator will automatically plug in 1, 2, 3, 4, all the numbers. They're going to try to divide it into 126. So it's going to generate a table instead of us having to come up with it ourselves. So this is a shortcut. So once you type it in here and you take your number divided by x, so your number has to go first. And then what I want to ask you to do here is I'm going to move this up so you can see it a little bit better. Hit Control and the letter T. So if you hit Control T, the table shows up. So notice that when they plug in 1, it goes in 126 times. 2, 36. 3, 42. So I'm going to keep on scrolling down. Anything that has a decimal, we're not using. We're only sticking with the ones that have whole numbers. All right, so I'm going to remind you what we're looking for again. So you can look for this in the table. We're looking for two numbers that if you add them together, they would give you 25. And there it is. 7 and 18, if I add those two numbers together, would give me 25. So I'm going to put 7x, 18x. Now remember, we need them to be a negative 25. So because we're adding, they have to be the same. So that would be a negative and a negative. So a negative 7 minus 18 would give you a negative 25. So we have what we need. Let's set this aside. And then we can go ahead and expand. So we now know that this is going to be 3x squared minus 7x minus 18x plus 42 equals 0. Now we don't need the equal 0 until the very end. But I'm going to go ahead and since it's 4 terms, we can factor by grouping. So I'm going to go through this part very quickly. The number that goes into 3 and 7 is 1. They both have x, so the smallest one is just an x. 3 divided by 1 is 3. 2 minus 1 is 1. Negative 7 divided by 1 is negative 7. X minus x is 0. Take your negative, bring it down. All right, if you find the GCD of 18 and 42. 18 and 42. That gives us 6. So we're going to divide by a -6 because they both don't have x. So this gives me a positive 3x minus 7 equals 0. So just keep on bringing down the equal 0 because we actually don't need it until the very end. So we're going to take this and this because we now know that we've done it correctly. We can go ahead and put it once. 3x minus 7. Cross it out. Whatever's left over gets put in the second parentheses. So that gives us x minus 6 equals 0. All right, we have two sets of parentheses. They cannot factor any further. Nothing divides into 3 and 7. Nothing divides into 1 and 6. So we can now say 3x minus 7 equals 0. Then we get to say x minus 6 equals 0. And then we're going to solve each one of these so we can graph it out. Let's add 7 to both sides. So we get 3x equals 7 divided by 3. So if you take a 7 and divide it by 3, it's going to give you a decimal. And it's going to be x is equal to 2.3. So it's slightly above the 2. All right, here, all we have to do is add 6. So we get x is equal to 6. So we have two x-intercepts here, 2.3 and 6. So I'm going to go over here. 2.3 is slightly above the 2. And then 6 is right here. So I want to remind you, these will always be, these numbers right here will always be the x-intercept on the x-axis. So I want to remind you, because that's a positive number right there, this is going to be a graph that opens up. So it's a U-shaped graph, and it would cross right there. All right, so I'm going to actually pause right here. We do have one more example that we want to look at from start to finish, but I'm going to throw it into the other video. Now keep in mind that in order for us to do what we're doing, we have to have an equal 0 at the end. So this one had an equal 0, this one had an equal 0. But notice that our third example right here does not have a 0 right there. So in the next video, I'll tell you what to do to get rid of that -2 in, so we can have a 0 there and then do what we did to finish this problem off. So I hope this has helped, and I will see you guys in the next video.